Namaste, happy friends. Welcome to our podcast solo episode with Happy Hanna and all of you. Today is a special day in um, that Happy Jack is in India. He's having some incredible moments in India, and he cannot wait to bring all of us there in November this year, 2025. And yeah, he sends all his love and warmest hugs from where he is. It's late at night, so that's why he can't join the calls. And we decided that the next two episodes are going to be Happy Hanna focused to bring in some balance. Typically, the podcast is about how Happy Jack is doing, what he's realizing in his world. And I'm kind of typically there just to support him. And today, I'm here to support myself with all of you. And next week, we'll have a guest. So I asked our community, what would you like me to talk about? And I know that's a kind of a weird question to ask because um, it's a big question, right? Like what should be the question? And maybe some of you come up with questions here as we sit together in our Zoom room. So you're welcome to put any thoughts into the chat. But I did get some answers from you all, and I thought that I could use that as our kind of syntax today. And I'll start with the question I got this similar question from two different yogis, and they mentioned they wanted to hear about my journey. And I think, what about my journey have I not shared yet? I feel like I have and do share a lot about it, but maybe I haven't shared so much about the recent years. As Jack and I have uncoupled, and our kind of roles in a way have shifted to the better in a way, I find. And we haven't led in-person trainings that much. So maybe I haven't kind of shared about the recent years. And just to share from a little bit from the beginning, because not all of you know, of course, why should you, all about me, but I'm just going to kind of give you a background on how I and why I practice yoga. I am from Finland and I am 49. And I lived in Finland for my teenage years. And as a young adult, when I was 18, I moved abroad and have lived in Central or Southern Europe until I was married and had two babies. In Italy, I met my Norwegian husband, and we had two babies in Milan, and felt guilty. As some of you might know, in Milan, to this day, there's a lot of smog in the city because it's in a kind of a plain field, and then there's the mountains behind, and for whatever reason, it doesn't have great air. And we felt guilty as kind of Scandinavians. We're used to raising our kids outside. So we moved to Norway to be close to my in-laws and to raise the kids. And it was maybe the biggest cultural shock I ever experienced. It was not easy, and I was not prepared. I was 29, and then we decided we're going to move back to Milan right before the kids go to school. Like, we thought that was really smart move. And they were Axel, the youngest one, wasn't even 3, and the older one was 5. And we sold the house quickly and U-turned our lives, and we're going to move back to Milan. And in that transition, my husband got a virus that attacked his nervous system, and in a matter of hours, he died. So you can imagine that after that, my whole universe kind of collapsed, imploded and exploded at once. um, I now know that I've been on a journey of traumatic grief for now 17, almost 18 years. So I was 31 and widowed with a 5 and a 3-year-old in a country that I did not belong to. And I got launched into yoga because I found a therapist the same week my husband died. And she, for whatever reason, she said, you should try yoga. And I did, and I loved it. I was kind of like a past life yogi. I could very easily do all the moves. And though the impact of the practice was unsustainable, I could not do yoga and cook the same day, for example. It would completely wiped me out. And so maybe that speaks about the shock that was in my body. So the yoga poses were not the right way for me to hold um the shock that I was processing. It took a long time to process the shock, and it was a big journey. And though I was really interested in yoga still, because I had really big questions on my mind. I was, wanting to know why and what happens to the soul, because I did see my husband's body. I did travel to Milan right after he passed. And it was very, let's use the word therapeutic to see him, because then I understood that it's over. I wasn't fantasizing. Of course, I was longing for him and wanting to reverse everything, and had to go through some really big decisions inside my heart where I was not going to play the what if game too much, because then I could get stuck in that. And the grief was so overwhelming and overpowering that I knew that if I wanted to survive, I had to do something with it. I could not just sit there and be with that amount of pain, because it would kill me too. And so therapy and yoga and meditation and yoga philosophy came my ways to explain or try to understand or find some meaning in a world that didn't make any sense. It's hard to, people do die, and I understand I'm not the only one in the world, but when it's the father of your children, it's really hard to kind of get over it. You don't, because there's always one person missing acutely at all times. Anytime I would open my eyes in the morning, um everything was wrong. And it's hard to be in a space like that, and it's hard to be close to someone like that. So I knew that it was kind of like I was launched um, into this really tough journey, and it was very lonely too. And it reshaped, I think, me in how what I take for granted and what I don't. And it was very humbling and soul crushing, and also I was raising kids. So I've raised 2 kids in grief, so they will have some impact directly just from that, even. And they've gone through there and are going and will always be going through their own parallel journeys when it comes to trying to understand what happens to, like, does something happen to the soul? Where do we go when life is over? What's the point of life then if we're just going to die? What's the point of love if we're going to lose each other? I remember thinking for a long time, because I have an early attachment wound as well, in that when I was a baby, my father was an alcoholic and was not able to raise me. And so my mom did. And that means that in some part of myself that I'm not conscious of, I was abandoned as a baby. And I never thought of it as a big deal because I grew up with that. I never longed for one more parent, because how could you long for something you never had? I could see that other people had several parents, 2 parents, but it didn't mean anything to me. I didn't feel like I was brought up in any type of lack. I wish my mom could have been more at home. That's what I wanted, you know. But when something like this happens, grief is a big attachment wound too. I mean, death is when you lose somebody, there's the loss of, your primal attachment person. So the processing of loss, and then thinking, what's the point of love when we know that either people are going to walk away or they're going to die? So what's the point of love? And so I had big questions in my heart. And it's, you can imagine, I'm sure, that you could answer those questions from many places. There's many theories. And you can stay positive, or you can stay negative, or you can stay in between. You can kind of, like they say, you have to do your own research. What, what theory applies, and which school of thought do I want to belong to, and what resonates really deeply with me. And that has been a journey for me that has changed also. It hasn't always been like, oh, yoga philosophy was really helpful to me in early grief, like the same week and the same couple of years, and most of the years actually to this day has been helpful in that it says that there is point in love, there is point in having the human experience, because the soul will transform, maybe survive, and none of us will have, most of us won't have solid proof of that in this lifetime. Right now, when we're sitting here with the questions, there's not going to be a text message saying, bing, boom, Hanna, you got it, that's the right theory. But it's an open-ended question. And that's what my journey is about. It's asking why and how. Why do good things happen to bad people? And why is the universe, so full of duality? Why is there suffering? And each of us get to practice finding answers to those questions in our own ways. And you don't have to have such a tragedy in life like I had. You could have a dark night of the soul. You could have a breakup. You could have a disappointment. You could have worry. Sometimes stress and worry can ignite really deep questions in us. So I found it really meaningful to try to let's call it my problem. Let my problem be my tool. To use the pain and the difficulties and the molding of my heart, to become a person who's available to life, available to the people. So that's how my journey began. And yoga was a great tool. Even if I couldn't do the yoga poses, I was studying yoga philosophy and the different yogic techniques. There's many things you can do as a yogi that aren't yoga poses, like meditation, like reading, like breathing. All of us do that all the time. And it deepened my life experience, and it helped me manage the pain. And it doesn't mean that I was always optimistic. I was still pulsating with pain. And that's what a lot of us people do. We just don't have such a dramatic example as I do. Sometimes we're just kind of in this comfortable sweet spot between laziness and suffering and not knowing what to do. Many of us spend years in an okay place. So there's a question in the chat that says, you never got over a trauma like that. The trick is learning how to live with it. Yeah. How do we live with the one thing that we'd rather not live with? All of us, we have some one thing. If we only didn't have that one. For some, it's finances. For some, it's an unfulfilling relationship or some big, maybe adversity in life that that one thing we didn't ask for. If I only could have this one thing go my way, then I would be happy. And sometimes we come to these techniques like yoga, hoping that it will take our problems away. And that's not how yoga works. That's not how life works. That's not how death works. My husband's never going to walk in that door and say, actually, good girl, you survived. Here's your reward. Maybe if the soul is a thing and when it's my time to go, maybe I can meet his soul, but I don't know. Or maybe our souls, poof, like turn into everythingness. And we can see wisdom and beauty in nature and in each snowflake. We don't know. But my journey from such difficult strategy, like I have been, as the comment that Sue left in the chat, learning how to live with it. That's what I do for a living. I live with it. And I don't feel like I'm living in grief necessarily. I know what grief feels like and how grief has kind of like molded itself into kind of like wine, it ages and has some characteristics. I assume that's an analogy that could work. Things that age or kind of mature, they develop new flavors, and it's not longer like acute pain or pulsating wound even. I know what it feels like, all of those different things in my body and in my mind. And I know how to name it. I know how to recognize it. But it happens less and less that I'm in a pulsating pain place, for example. But I'm sure should something happen to someone I love, I would quickly have those symptoms again, because that's how, I guess by now my body is a little bit wired to process things because it was so many years of that. But yeah, you just never know how the body responds. And that's another thing that yoga is really good at. It's helping us find the present moment and noticing what is true. Because I think a lot of us would rather, the one thing that we don't want to have in our life, the one thing that isn't right, the one thing that is kind of the one thing that keeps showing up as a pattern, as an issue in your life, we try to avoid it oftentimes. I didn't have a choice, so I had to face all of it. And with grief, what's interesting is that all of your previous issues will come kind of like a tsunami with that grief, with the current version. So that's why I mentioned my early wounding, for example, because it also came like a kaboom. You'd think like, well, I'm a little fragile. Like maybe no, it's not the time to like explode my whole entire model of the world that I built up nicely so that I can live with it. But my therapist, bam, she took me right back there. And so tell me about your childhood. Tell me about your parents. And then she was saying, like, what I'm hearing is this, this, and this early childhood experiences that are deeply traumatizing. And I'm like, oh, it's true. I don't know if I can handle this. And it is the greatest gift that I ever received. Is my therapist being really honest and really kind and really truthful in kind of dismantling my psychological construct, like I'm fine. I'm fine, I'm so fine about my childhood. I'm so over it, my childhood. Those things, when we have the need to say that it's a coping mechanism, and coping mechanisms are great, we need them, they are useful, and also they are limiting to how much access we have to the whole truth, because the truth, as we know, it sets us free, it gives us space to move. And sometimes it's hard to make sense of those mechanisms. And it often is about avoidance, because we feel that if we go to a place that is difficult inside ourselves, we are afraid it'll last forever, or it says or means something about us. We make it mean something. A successful person shouldn't feel da 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 or whatever it is. We're worried about not living our best life, or our potential might be kind of, we're afraid of maybe the shadow sides or the darker, deeper places in ourselves. But that's where nutrient comes from. If we think about the lotus analogy, the mud is under the water, it's deep, it's full of germs and whatnot, and the roots go really deep into the mud, getting soil nutrients, fertile ground, and it feeds the flower that then grows through the water. Even if it's waves and whatever happens, and the water is strong, right? The lotus flower still grows over the water, and then it blooms on the surface of the water, having access to sunlight. And that perfect alchemy of upper world and underworld and medium world, as they would maybe phrase it in South and Central America, the idea of 3 different worlds, that perfect alchemy then makes the flower miraculously bloom. And so we need all of it, and how we manage to do that can be, a life journey. So you guys asked me about my journey. That's how my journey is and has been. And from studying yoga, philosophy, going to India, taking teacher trainings, all of that has been really enriching for me, and kind of like an experiment. What if I do mantra? What happens if I use sound? How does my psyche and my soul and my body respond to sound, for example? And these are yogic techniques that we can kind of harness and learn something new about ourselves, and help ourselves heal and see things from like a different perspective, or with a different kind of, from a different theory, apply another theory onto ourselves and see how that lands. And that's what I did for many years. And then I finally, after many years of searching, I found a psychotherapy training that was the right one for me. I wanted to do maybe a bachelor in psychology, but I was really mindful not to step into a place that wouldn't be kind of open enough. Because if it's very much based on old theory, which I respect, though I would find it difficult to see how that applies to my model of the world. So then I found a training that combines yoga and psychology, and it's a master's level training, and I'm still in it. And the reason I'm sharing this is because the recent years of my journey have been maybe the best ever, because as any of the yoga philosophy and the yogic techniques that I've learned and practiced during these past, let's say, 20 years, they've been really helpful. And I think they address a beautiful part of self. But what I've loved about psychotherapy and psychology is that it is even more precise in naming and navigating. And what I love about psychotherapy is that it's relational, meaning that there's a relationship. So it's a little bit less isolating. Sometimes yoga, even though it's done in a community, oftentimes I would practice mostly in communities, and lead communities and create a community with Jack. And that's been deeply healing. So that's also relational. But what I've loved about therapy is that there's a deep relationship with the therapist. So that's why it's important you find the right one. And research shows that it doesn't matter what type of therapy you end up, if your therapist is a cognitive behavioral or something completely different, a psychoanalyst, it doesn't matter the efficacy of the therapeutic interaction, the efficacy of therapy doesn't depend on the style of therapy that you end up in, but the relationship that you have with your therapist is what is the healing agent in a therapeutic encounter. Meaning when you start seeing someone, and it doesn't have to take 20 years, like in my case, but even short-term therapy can be paradigm shifting. And you learn to live in yourself and in your own life again with more options and depth and alternatives. We're no longer a victim of our imprints. And everyone here who is a yogi knows, like, yeah, imprints, we have that in yoga. It's called samskara, for example. And this is true. But I find that in modern psychology, there's so many ways we explore and explain patterns, right? Through neurobiology, but also different techniques. There's so many different ways to work with patterns and name them. It becomes kind of like there's a little bit more, I would say, like fertile ground through psychotherapy to start seeing patterns and how they show up in the different areas, the different layers of self. In yoga, we talked about the koshas, meaning we have different layers of the self. I'm not just my body in yoga. I also have an energy body, and I have a mental, emotional body, like a layer. Then I have a higher self body, Anandamaya kosha, the bliss body. And these are all kind of intertwined. And in therapy, we can really explore those and learn techniques on how to understand ourselves better. And why all this self navel gazing? Because then it changes who you are to other people. Anyone who's taken a yoga teacher training knows that whatever I learned became mine, and now I am allowed to share it. Meaning we don't have to therapize other people, but we can hold them differently. We can understand them. We can create a different space when we have tools and access. And it goes exactly parallel, hand in hand with what we're willing to hold in ourselves. I can't give you what I don't have, but if I have myself, then I can make room for you in a new way, in a deeper way. And that has been the greatest, most beautiful gift that I ever gave myself, was to be in therapy and to take a training so that I can spend the rest of my life in conversations like this and with another person. And we kind of, for that time together, we both use everything we are and everything that we have focused on that individual's journey, what they are working on, what they are learning, and what is easy and what is hard about being a human being and having all the complexities thrown at us. I sometimes I wonder how this society, like in the past we were in bigger groups, now we're become individualized, everyone's in their own snow globe and kind of has to just get on with the Joneses or not. But like to get your things going and make life decisions and take care of children and themselves, we assume that all of that just happens automatically. And when it doesn't, that's a problem. Whereas I think that um, it's important and paradigm shifting and life quality shifting when we can have different types of relationships, therapeutic relationships, and they don't always have to be with a therapist. That's why I think a lot of people seek to yoga, because it is an alternative relationship to work life or family life. It becomes a space where we can explore and discuss things and be like curious about different theories on how to practice, how to be in the world. And I remember when my husband died, I asked the local kind of health authorities, you know how there's like a health care system, about therapy. And they said, well, if in a family just one person dies, then we don't have any arrangements. And I was like, what? Do I have to die to get help? And the whole point was trying not to die so that my children would have at least one parent. And so the society and the systems are made up in a way where we're kind of shamed into living alone, our own little balls of coping mechanisms. And to me, that has shown to be quite restrictive. And I see that with my clients. I'm so blessed to see clients every day now, almost every day. And what I see that people are kind of a little bit like prisoners in their own patterning. They've decided like, this is the newsletter or this is the life philosophy that I subscribe to, in the lack of other options. And then sometimes it works and a lot of times it doesn't. And it's really lonely, isolating. It's like we're all in our own prisoners inside of ourselves and with our own challenges. We're really lonely in that. There's a loneliness pandemic. And there's many reasons for such a big societal issue, right? And one of it is the way the society has, in a way, we have a lot of independence, but then we also have a lot of loneliness. And for me, the psychotherapeutic encounters have been the most soul opening and most meaningful thing that I've done since I found yoga. I often say that to my supervisor, and to anyone who cares to listen, which now happens to be you, is that therapy and this becoming a therapist is almost better than when I found yoga. Like, it's the discovery that because it's more precise, it's more personalized and personable, it's really beautiful and full of opportunity, and I just really, every part of me loves it deeply. It's helped me in all my relationships, because the lecture number one in my training was, you are your own first client. And yogis know that your practice will inform how you teach. So what you learn and what you're able to implement is key, because I will use myself as a tool. I am my own tool. And yes, I need to take trainings and keep up with new research and see how that all lands and how I can make that make sense or not, or how I can apply it. But all I really have is myself. And that's true for all of us. It's just the ways we've decided to kind of apply self and offer ourselves to the world that might differ. So I feel like that is, in short, I don't know if this was short, but that would be like my journey in terms of where I am now, how I got here. And if there's any area that you guys would want me to explain, please put it in the chat or message us info@happyjackyoga.com and we'll get back to you. And that's kind of what I'm thinking about. There was another question from another yogi who's here on this call. What are my current spiritual beliefs? I love that. That question just popped in the chat. I'm going to answer that in a second. First, I'm going to answer the question that was sent to us by email. And the question was, if I was a kind of a new yogi, how would I understand the impact of yoga outside of the yoga mat, like the yoga asana? How does that show up, say, in my work life? And the answer to that is kind of like nutrients. Like, how do I know how that omega 3s are hitting my brain right? Or how do I know if I have vitamin C or vitamin D? Well, of course, vitamin D, you can go and take a test and see your levels, but it's like yoga asana impacts all yogis here know it because we have all been on the yoga mat for the first time and then a year later and many years later. So we can see how it molds us. But typically, when a yogi comes to a yoga class, it doesn't matter again what kind of yoga, any kind that they like. Then they notice that they like the feeling, maybe in a pose, they have like a micro moment of bliss or alignment or something other than what I typically experience happens, right? Some people, when they run, they have a runner's high. So they get hooked to that. Some people, when they yoga, they notice like, it does something to my heart, to my soul, to my calmness. It's like I become a better version of myself. And then sometimes it doesn't last. So we go to work and we get really mad. And sometimes it does last. It's a matter of practice, but it won't erase. Yoga won't erase who you are and your issues. It's not a magical tool in that way that you do yoga and then you won't have problems anymore. That's kind of like the toxic positivity wave that might want to sell it this way. But yoga, for most people who come to yoga, they notice something happens with me. And then they get curious and then they stick with the practice. And then they notice it's a really healthy environment. Everyone in this class, they are actually able to look each other in the eyes in the changing room or say hi or acknowledge each other. And you make friends and you take a training because you fall in love with it. So it changes you kind of slowly. And it impacts you in the ways, even if it wouldn't last, let's say the yoga bliss wouldn't last, you go to work and you're still mad, or sometimes we laugh at ourselves, right? When we're in a rush to yoga class, we're like driving really fast, like everybody out of the way, I'm going to yoga. I'm like, oh, wait a minute, that's not very yogic to be so aggressive. We laugh at ourselves because we are human beings. It's not like yoga erases obvious things about life, like traffic rage. Sometimes it does change it, but traffic might be intense anyway, and you might have a response to it, whatever intensity in your own imprints. But that's how yoga slowly molds us. And it's beautiful. For example, Jack's journey is a great example of how slowly sometimes it happens. Only now is he, what I think, actually embracing a lot more of what yoga could be. And each and every one, we have our own past patterns and how it all lands. So there's not one way yoga impacts us or one way it should impact us. We all have our own sacred journey and we have a say in it. We have a full and we can participate in our own journey by making decisions. And there's a question about my current spiritual beliefs. So, as I probably am quite transparent about it, I don't belong to any spiritual organization. I don't belong to a church or a temple or any even yogic lineage, really. And I've been exposed to many of them, of course, not all of them. And I'm curious about the different yogic lineages and a little bit disheartened by them as well, because there is a lot of kind of like in the religious circles too. There's been a lot of use of power in the wrong ways. And that doesn't mean that the spiritual system doesn't work, even if some people have used it in a not good way. So for me, there isn't, um, like when I ask myself this question, what are my current spiritual beliefs? It's like having been exposed to Christian and Judeo-Christian traditions, grown up in a Christian country, even though it's maybe one of the least Christian countries that I've ever been to, even if we have religion in school and we kind of study the Bible, and that it's the country with the least people. If you go and look at the gorgeous, marvelous churches, they are empty every Sunday. Like there's not a lot of people that actually practice in Finland. Then I lived in Catholic countries. And now I'm in North America, where I feel like it's more religious here than actually Europe. Um, and then being exposed to the Eastern tradition, having studied Buddhism, and I did a world religion class in a university, and I was exposed to the traditions of Central and Southern America. And I don't know that I know a lot about the indigenous culture here in Canada, but some books that I've read, it seems like there's a common thread in those traditions as well. So having said all that, what are my spiritual beliefs? I feel like, and I know this might sound like a very new agey thing, but I feel like they are all true. Like it's almost like theories. Like, is psychoanalysis better than um, cognitive behavioral therapy? For some it is, for some it isn't. It's one way to see the human being. Or these are different theories, these are different belief systems, so they are all true for me. And maybe a lot of the terminology might differ, and maybe the way and the goal of each kind of spiritual tradition might differ hugely. So I am not saying that they all lead to oneness or that they all are the same. I don't think that. And how complex the universe is, I don't know. And if there is a part of the universe where you know these traditions come from, where this is more true than that, it could be. I don't know. I haven't dedicated my life to any of the traditions um in a very serious way, let's say. I haven't picked one lineage and said, I'm going to use this method to get as close to God as I can, for example, or to dedicate my life to service in the name of this tradition. Because I think that I'm still in a place where I kind of stay a little bit sober, maybe, about it, having seen a lot of it and having practiced a lot of it. I feel like a lot of the traditions come with the thick layers of things you just have to then kind of copy paste and believe and assume. And sometimes through our practice, we can verify that the beliefs we are indoctrinated here in this tradition, they are valid and I accept them. But to me, they still are beliefs, which is different than facts. So for me, I deeply respect all types of spirituality. I cry when I go to Christmas church here in a school gym in North America and they play like soft rock Jesus music. I cry because to me it's deeply moving that there's something so incredibly transcendental and human, like where God and human meets. Or it's like, is it God reaching for us and we reaching for her or it or them? Whatever God is, the universe, this the unexplainable mystery that life is and its layers and subtleties are. So I find in my experience to feel or meet or be available to God, as far as I'm concerned, anyone that I've ever been exposed to have touched my heart and opened my heart or had an impact on my subtle self, if that makes sense, my soul or my becoming. And I haven't fallen in love with any one tradition where I feel like here's where I'm going to stay, but I have a deep respect for that if that happens to someone. And I think that it can be the most beautiful thing. And I think that for some of us, when we walk into a synagogue or a temple or we read a sacred text, maybe it is karma, meaning our past patterning, our makeup, our individual makeup, that tradition really resonates and really speaks to depths of us that we didn't know we had. And then that isn't, that could be that there's a calling. Also, I need to add, when I was young, I lived in a convent with nuns. And maybe that's why I haven't developed the type of disbelief or sarcasm towards religious systems, even if they can be used for not great things, just like yoga lineages. There's a lot of like yogic leaders who are kind of fallen because they've misused the funds and the power that they were given. And that's more about the human being than God, I think. If I don't know, kind of like we aren't built for social media, maybe we aren't built for those amounts of power either. Most people have a hard time dealing with fame, for example, being exposed, or in social media, right? When we scroll, we can see, for example, right now, the destruction that happened in LA. I think we should stay informed and do what we can to help. Or Gaza, like the devastation, the heartbreak of a war reality. There's a limit to how much we can take it in and what we can do with it and how much of it is helpful or just normal, let's say, social media scrolling, right? Or us posting on social media. Like, it's not natural for us to be exposed to millions of people so it's gonna present some challenge. And the same with power. If we're given too much power, it seems like the human being doesn't respond very well. And hence a lot of the religious traditions have misused their power. And also not. A lot of religious movements are doing incredible good and try to build bridges between different social groups and ethnicities or whatever, however you say that word. So my current spiritual beliefs is that every single one that I've ever been exposed to is incredibly beautiful and precious and has a lot of depth and wisdom and possibility in it. And I don't belong to one. I feel also like religion in the past was like our first self-help. And a lot of that self-help now feels a bit outdated, but you can still use it. And you can see the wisdom now in religious traditions, um, from the self-help perspective, because now we have so many different ways to self-help. And so if it works, it works. And if it feels right, it is right. And it's a beautiful place to look for guidance. Oftentimes we look for guidance when tragedies happen, when we have a conflict, dark night of the soul, when we don't know what the next right step is. Then we look to higher powers beyond us. And I think there is something beyond the individual, beyond the obvious. So I'm going to look at the questions that I received from our community. And now the file won't open, so I can't just jump right at it. I wish I had it open earlier, of course. Can't open it right now. Somehow my computer is old and works really slowly. But I remember one question from a yogi now it comes to mind. It was a question around letting go. How to let go of things. How not to stay stuck in the past or in our past patterning, right? Like, how was I able to go of my grief, for example? A lot of people told me that I have to let go of my husband, and it felt so wrong, because how can you let go of something that is permanently a problem? It feels like a paradox, or at least it did for me. But I feel like if we're talking about like letting go of, let's say, something we're sad about or think is wrong, I think that it's kind of like, when you're switching diets. Seems like I'm coming with a lot of nutritional insights today. But when we switch diets, oftentimes it's saying like, don't do a diet, don't shift drastically immediately, but start adding in like avocado. Start adding in more greens and broccoli, and start to look for the nutrients that you would want, that you ate more of. And then you'll notice, and in fact, I think science proves that the microbiome will respond quite quickly and will start craving those new foods. And it is kind of like an organic shift. When it comes to letting go, I'm thinking that we can't really just let go. It's not how transformation works. It doesn't work like I now decide to let go of this, that, and the other. It's more like you start adding in, maybe trying different things and looking at things from different perspectives. So we're kind of, and this might not sound fun, but I believe that we're kind of are meant to struggle too. It's part of the plan. That's how we evolve. If you think about a relationship, when you first fell in love, you're in like this ultimate bliss for X amount of time. And then the first problem shows up and there's a discord and maybe even a conversation. And then you are left wondering, like, what happened to the bliss? Like, what? Isn't this my dream partner after all? But if you manage to get through that, the bliss after will be more deep and more real. And so struggles and the things we want to let go of are kind of like our problems that we use as tools, right? So when my husband died, I had to do something about this problem. I had to transform it somehow because otherwise it would have consumed me and I wouldn't have been able to function in the society and be a mom. So I had to find ways. I had no other choice. So that's why it's a great example. And I know not for everyone, hopefully you'll never lose anyone in a traumatic way. And you don't have to learn it. We learn from small problems as well. That's the good news. The things we want to let go of. What if we were okay with the fact that we can't let go, but it will be a tool for transformation and it will be shifting and changing and not eternal. That's the thing with like negative things, so-called negative things, is that we think they're going to last forever and they're going to define who we are in our future. And it's the one thing that we would just not want to live with. And when you look at your own becoming since you were a teenager, what things were important then, what things were problems then, how you navigated through them, what you now know because of those things that didn't go as planned. It's sometimes it's how can I say, sometimes it's humbling and it makes us vulnerable because we notice we don't have control, and that's why we love to have certainty. So we create all kinds of systems, coping mechanisms. And one therapist once said, Hanna, coping is a lifestyle that a lot of people subscribe to. Coping becomes the lifestyle. And I think that is so funny. I don't want my life to be a coping strategy. I want to crack the code and be brave and meet myself and the challenges and hold myself as I go through that. And that's what we can do with our practice, with our relationships. Healing is always relational. It happens in relationship. Whatever relationship that is. Maybe it's with your intimate partner, with your best friend, your family, your community, your besties. But make sure to cultivate and create relationship and meet them and with a humble and open heart. And letting go is a tool for transformation that it takes a bit time, but it happens. It always happens. Okay, friends, this was my solo episode. We got through it. Thank you so much for holding me as I talked for an hour. Thanks for listening. And please send me messages if I wasn't clear or if I said something that isn't right. I apologize in advance. These are just my humble thoughts. Thank you so much for being here. I look forward to next week with a guest. See you then. Namaste, friends. Bye. Bye, everyone.